Her small wheelchair stood frozen in the middle of a crowded hospital corridor. Doctors passed by, shaking their heads with pity. Nurses whispered to one another, their eyes heavy with sadness. And then, from the corner, a boy in torn clothes, dirt smudged across his face, stepped forward and whispered words that silenced the hallway. "I can help her. Just give me one chance." This is the story of Amelia Williams, the daughter of a world-renowned surgeon, a girl who had never taken a single step in her entire life. From the moment she was born, Amelia was diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder. Specialists flew in from every corner of the world. The best hospitals, the most advanced treatments, endless therapy sessions, yet nothing changed. For 12 long years, Amelia's feet never touched the ground. Her father, Dr. Robert Williams, was known as a miracle surgeon, the man who performed impossible operations, the man who healed children others had given up on. But when it came to his own daughter, he was powerless. The weight of his reputation became his greatest burden. To the world, he was a hero, but inside, he was a broken man who couldn't save the person he loved most. Amelia's mother tried to hold the family together with warmth and faith, yet behind her smile was exhaustion, the kind only years of heartbreak could carve into a face. She prayed, she hoped, but each passing year chipped away at her belief that her daughter would ever walk. On the outside, the Williams family looked blessed. Wealth, reputation, admiration. But behind the mansion doors was silence, grief, and despair. Their daughter's laughter was rare, their joy overshadowed by what seemed to be an unchangeable truth. Amelia would never walk. But all of that was about to change, not because of a doctor or a surgeon or a specialist, but because of a boy no one believed in. Let me ask you this. If every doctor told you your child would never walk, would you keep hoping? Or would you finally give up? Share your thoughts in the comments. And before we go deeper into Amelia's extraordinary journey, make sure to subscribe, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about miracles, medicine, and hope. On the cold steps of Chicago Memorial Hospital, another figure was slowly becoming part of the building's shadow. His name was Daniel. He was only 13 years old, but life had already written hardship across his face. His clothes were torn, his shoes barely held together, and his hands were always clutching a ragged old notebook, its pages filled with sketches, scribbles, and words only he seemed to understand. Daniel was homeless. He had been since the death of the only person who ever made him feel safe, his grandmother. She had once been a nurse in this very hospital, known by everyone for her warmth, her patience, and her uncanny ability to notice things that doctors overlooked. "The charts can tell you one thing," she used to say, "but a patient's eyes, their breathing, even the way they hold their hands, tells you the rest of the story." Daniel grew up watching her, learning not from textbooks, but from the quiet observations she whispered to him at a bedside. When she passed away, the world became cruel. With no family left and no home to return to, Daniel drifted onto the streets. But he carried one thing with him always, her notebook. Its pages were wrinkled and stained, but every line was a memory of her wisdom. He guarded it like treasure, because to him, it was. Most nights, Daniel found warmth where he could. Shelters, train stations, or, when he was lucky, inside the hospital lobby. He knew the security guards by name, and they knew him too, not with kindness, but with irritation. "You don't belong here," they would bark, pushing him back into the freezing night air. And yet, he always returned, because something in his heart tied him to that place. It was during one of those nights, when the fluorescent lights of the hospital flickered against polished floors, that Daniel saw her, a girl in a wheelchair. Pale, fragile, but with eyes that seemed louder than her voice. He didn't know her name yet, but he felt something stir inside him, something that reminded him of his grandmother's words. "If you see someone suffering, never walk away." So he didn't. He lingered, watching her from a corner, noticing details the busy doctors didn't see. Her fingers twitched at odd moments. Her breathing shifted when she was lifted from her chair. Even the way her head tilted seemed to suggest something more than the rigid diagnosis she'd been given. To anyone else, Amelia looked like a child permanently trapped in her wheelchair. But to Daniel, she looked like a puzzle, one that could be solved. The first time he dared to step closer, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "You don't move like the others do. It's not what they think it is. Amelia's mother turned sharply, startled to see a ragged boy hovering near her daughter. A nurse rushed over, scolding him, shoving him back toward the doors. But Daniel's eyes never left Amelia's. In that instant, she smiled faintly, as if she knew he saw something in her that no one else did. When word of the encounter reached Dr. Robert Williams, his reaction was swift and cold. He confronted Daniel in the lobby, his voice like a blade. "You're just a homeless boy. Stay away from my daughter." His words were meant to end the conversation, but Daniel didn't flinch. He clutched his notebook tighter and said only one thing. "Sometimes the truth comes from people you don't expect." Those words stung, though Dr. Williams would never admit it, because buried under the anger was fear. The fear that a boy with nothing, a boy with no medical degree, no authority, no home, could see something that he, the miracle surgeon, had missed all these years. But Daniel wasn't chasing pride. He wasn't looking for recognition. He was chasing a promise. The promise he made to his grandmother as she lay in her hospital bed, that he would never ignore someone suffering if there was even the smallest chance he could help. And as he watched Amelia from the distance, Daniel knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that she was not beyond hope. He just needed someone, anyone, to believe him. But tell me this, what do you think? Do you believe wisdom can come from unexpected places? Could the eyes of a child or the heart of a homeless boy hold answers that experts miss? Tell us in the comments below. And before we continue, if this story is already pulling you in, make sure to subscribe right now, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about healing, faith, and miracles. Days passed, and despite Dr. Williams' harsh warning, Daniel could not ignore Amelia. Something inside him refused to let go. He began to linger around the hospital gardens, the playroom, even the quiet hallways where Amelia often sat in her chair, staring at the world outside the window. One afternoon, when the nurses were busy, Daniel dared to sit beside her. His voice was low, gentle, as though he feared the walls might betray his secret. "Do you trust me?" he asked. Amelia tilted her head, curious but not afraid. "I don't know you," she whispered, "but you look like you do." And that was enough. From that moment, a fragile bond was formed. Daniel began showing her tiny exercises, simple things his grandmother once used with stroke patients. He guided her to press her heel against the wheelchair footrest, to try lifting her toes as if she were pushing invisible piano keys. They were movements so small, so ordinary, that anyone else would have thought they were meaningless. But to Amelia, they were mountains. Day after day, they practiced in secret, hidden from her father's eyes. Amelia would close her eyes, concentrating, listening to Daniel's calm voice. "Don't fight your body, just listen to it, one little signal at a time." And then, one afternoon, as the sunlight spilled across the floor, it happened. A twitch, just the slightest movement in her toes. Amelia gasped. Her eyes widened in disbelief. For 12 years her feet had been motionless. But now, a spark of life. She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I did it, Daniel, I moved it." It was small, almost invisible. But to her, it was everything. Her mother walked in just in time to see the joy on Amelia's face. At first, she thought it was just imagination. But when Amelia showed her, when that tiny toe shifted beneath the blanket, Mrs. Williams froze. For a moment, she could hardly breathe. She turned to Daniel, suspicion and hope wrestling in her voice. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Daniel swallowed, clutching his grandmother's notebook. "I'm not hurting her. I'm helping. Just little things my grandma taught me. Things no one else ever noticed." Mrs. Williams narrowed her eyes. Years of false hope had hardened her heart. She wanted to believe, but how could she trust a boy with no home, no training, no proof? "Why should I believe you?" she asked softly. Daniel opened his notebook and showed her the faded handwriting. Diagrams, notes, little sketches of hands and feet with arrows pointing at nerves and muscles. "Doctors see charts," he said, his voice steady, "but nurses see patients. My grandma taught me to listen with my eyes. And I can see, Amelia isn't broken, she's waiting." Mrs. Williams felt her chest tighten. For so long she had prayed for a sign, for something, anything, to prove her daughter wasn't lost forever. Was it possible that the answer had come through this boy? But not everyone shared her fragile faith. Word began to spread among the staff that the homeless boy was interfering. Some mocked him openly in the hallways. A miracle worker now? One nurse scoffed. Maybe next he'll perform heart surgery with crayons. Security was warned to keep him out. Every time he walked into the lobby, stern voices threatened, "Leave before we drag you out." Still, Amelia defended him. Every chance she got, she begged to see him. She wanted those tiny victories, those moments that gave her something no doctor had ever given her: hope. But just as Daniel and Amelia began to taste the possibility of change, a new shadow loomed over them. The hospital board had decided Amelia's condition had reached a critical stage. A high-risk surgery was scheduled, an invasive procedure that might stabilize her condition, but would also destroy any chance of mobility forever. If the surgery went forward, Amelia's hope of walking would be gone, sealed by her father's own hand. When Amelia heard the news, she panicked. She turned to Daniel, clutching his hand. "They can't do this. I'm not ready to give up. Please, help me stop them." Daniel wanted to scream, to fight, to run into the boardroom and beg them to see what he had seen. But he was just a boy, and the walls of the hospital were taller than any street corner he had ever slept on. The night before the surgery, Amelia faced her father. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. "Dad," she said, "please listen to Daniel. He's helping me. I moved my toes. I know you don't believe it, but I felt it." But Dr. Williams's pride and fear exploded. His voice cracked like thunder through the room. "You don't understand science, Amelia. Stop this nonsense before you hurt yourself even more." Amelia flinched, tears rushing to her cheeks. For 12 years, she had obeyed every instruction, endured every treatment, lived with every failure. And now, for the first time, she felt her father's disbelief cut deeper than her own condition. Daniel, watching from the doorway, clenched his fists. He wasn't just fighting a disease anymore. He was fighting the walls of arrogance, pride, and fear. And time was running out. But what about you? If you were Amelia's parent, would you risk everything on a boy with no medical training, or would you trust the doctors and move forward with the surgery? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear what you think. And don't forget, if this story is stirring your heart, if you want to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe. Because the next chapter will take this story into a storm of conflict, and the choice Amelia's father makes will change their lives forever. The day of Amelia's surgery drew closer, and the air inside the Williams household felt heavy with dread. But Amelia, she had changed. Ever since that first spark of movement, she refused to surrender. She practiced Daniel's exercises in secret, holding on to the fragile hope that her body still had something left to give. And then one afternoon, it happened. Her mother was sitting beside her, folding laundry absent-mindedly, when Amelia straightened in her wheelchair. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "watch me." At first, Mrs. Williams thought it was just another desperate attempt, something she had seen many times before, ending only in tears. But this time, Amelia closed her eyes, pressed her heel down as Daniel had taught her, and with a trembling effort, her foot moved. Not a twitch, not a trick of the eye, a clear, undeniable movement. Mrs. Williams dropped the clothes in her lap, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled up instantly, streaming down her cheeks. For 12 years, she had begged God for a sign that her daughter's life was not doomed to that chair. And now, right before her very eyes, hope bloomed like fire. She fell to her knees beside Amelia, clutching her hand, sobbing. You did it! Oh my God, you did it!" Amelia was crying too, laughing through the tears. "Daniel was right, Mom. He was right all along." Word spread quickly, too quickly. Nurses, attendants, even skeptical staff members who had once mocked Daniel rushed into the room when Mrs. Williams shouted for them to come. And when Amelia repeated the movement, when her foot shifted, stronger this time, the room fell silent. Silent with disbelief, silent with awe. And then came Dr. Williams. He entered, expecting another ordinary checkup, but instead found his daughter surrounded by staff, his wife in tears, and Daniel standing proudly at her side. "What is happening here?" His voice was sharp, demanding. Mrs. Williams turned, her face still streaked with tears. "She moved, William. She moved her foot. Look for yourself." Dr. Williams' face froze as Amelia, trembling but determined, pressed her heel down and lifted her toes once again. The room gasped. For a man of science, for someone who had spent his life trusting only in data and textbooks, this was impossible. Impossible. yet undeniable. Amelia looked at her father with wide, tearful eyes. "Daddy, I can do it, I really can." But instead of joy, Dr. Williams' face burned with humiliation. The staff murmured, whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting between the girl, her father, and the boy who had given her what medicine never could. Dr. Williams' authority, his years of certainty, his pride, shattered in a single moment by a homeless boy and a daughter he had underestimated. Unable to face them, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed out of the room, the door slamming shut behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only Amelia's quiet sobs filled the air. And then Daniel stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached into his backpack. He pulled out something old, something worn from time, a faded ID card and a notebook filled with fragile, yellowed pages. "This," he said softly, "was my grandmother's." The staff leaned in, curious. Mrs. Williams wiped her eyes and took the card. The name on it made her gasp. For there, printed in black ink, was the name of a nurse who had once worked in this very hospital, under Dr. Williams himself, decades ago. "My grandmother wasn't just a nurse," Daniel continued, his voice firm despite the tremor. "She worked right here. She trained under your father, Mrs. Williams. She cared for patients everyone else had given up on. And when she died, she left me her notes. Every exercise, every observation, every story of the patients she refused to abandon." He opened the notebook, showing page after page of carefully drawn diagrams, descriptions of muscles, gentle techniques that bridged science with compassion. The staff stared, some whispering that they remembered her, others nodding slowly as the memory of her kindness came back. The truth was undeniable. Daniel wasn't just a boy grasping at hope. He carried the legacy of a woman who had once walked these halls, a woman whose methods had been overlooked, dismissed, forgotten, until now. But just as the room seemed to fill with hope, a new shadow fell across the moment. The hospital board had heard, and they were not pleased. Behind closed doors, whispers of scandal and reputation spread like wildfire. If it became known that a homeless boy had achieved what their best doctors had failed to do, the hospital's image would be shattered. Lawsuits could rise, trust could collapse, careers could end. And so quietly, ruthlessly, the board made its decision. Silence this incident. Erase it before it reached the public. Protect the institution at all costs, even if it meant burying Amelia's progress and burying Daniel's truth with it. But here's the question. If a hospital tried to cover up a miracle to protect its reputation, would you stay silent or would you fight to let the world know? Share your thoughts. I want to hear your voice on this. And if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe, because the next chapter will push everything to the breaking point, and the choice between truth and power will decide Amelia's future forever. The operating theater lights glowed cold and sterile, reflecting off the steel instruments that waited silently on the tray. Everything was prepared for Amelia's surgery. Her father's plan, his final attempt to control a fate he thought was inevitable. Amelia lay quietly on the hospital bed, her face pale, her heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. And then, as if carried by desperation itself, Daniel appeared. Somehow, against all odds, he slipped past the nurses, past the guards, and stood at the doorway of the room, his chest heaving with urgency. "Stop," he cried, his voice trembling but unshaken. "You can't do this. You can't cut her open. Your daughter can walk. Just give me one chance." The words struck the air like a thunderclap. The nurses froze. The anesthesiologist lowered his mask in disbelief. The staff turned their eyes to Dr. Williams, whose face had already begun to harden with fury. "How dare you interrupt this procedure?" he barked. "Security!" But before the guards could reach him, Amelia's voice, weak, yet sharp as glass, cut through the chaos. "Dad, please, don't send him away. Trust him, just this once." The room went still. Her plea hung heavy in the silence. The girl who had spent 12 years unable to move her legs now begged for the chance to prove herself, not through scalpels and anesthesia, but through the hands of a boy everyone else dismissed. The staff shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered that perhaps they had seen something impossible, something undeniable in her small movements earlier. Others shook their heads, bound by the rules of medicine and the weight of procedure. But Amelia's eyes, her tears, her desperate faith in Daniel, none of them could ignore it. Dr. Williams' face flushed red. He wanted to scream, to drag the boy out, to silence him once and for all. But then he looked at Amelia, his daughter, trembling, pleading, her eyes burning with a light he had not seen since she was a child. His hands shook. His pride screamed no. But his heart broke open. And at last, with a voice low and reluctant, he whispered, "One chance. That's all you get." The security guards froze. The staff gasped. Mrs. Williams pressed her hands to her mouth, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. And Daniel stepped forward. He knelt by Amelia's side, speaking softly, not as a doctor, not as an expert, but as a friend. "You've done this before, Amelia. Remember what we practiced. Small steps. Trust your body. Trust yourself." The room grew so quiet you could hear her shaky breath echoing against the walls. Amelia's hands gripped the bed frame. Daniel placed his palms gently at her back, guiding, not forcing, as he had learned from the pages of his grandmother's notebook. "Push your heel down," he whispered. "Feel the ground. Let it hold you." Her leg trembled violently. Gasps escaped the lips of the onlookers. "You can do it," Daniel urged. "Don't stop now." Then, with a cry that was half agony and half triumph, Amelia pressed down harder, and slowly, shakily, she lifted herself. Her body rose from the bed, trembling like a newborn fawn, but rising nonetheless. And then it happened. For the first time in 12 years, Amelia stood. The room erupted. Nurses clutched their chests in disbelief. The anesthesiologist whispered, "My God." A surgeon staggered back, unable to speak, and Mrs. Williams collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her joy pouring out like a flood she could no longer contain. But all eyes turned to Dr. Williams. He stood frozen, his lips trembling, his chest heaving as though the very ground beneath his beliefs had been torn away. For so long he had believed that only the knife, only the data, only the cold hand of science could save his daughter. But here she was, standing, not because of textbooks, not because of surgeries, but because of love, persistence, and the courage of a boy the world had discarded. Tears filled his eyes. His voice broke as he stepped forward, unable to contain the truth any longer. "I was blind," he whispered hoarsely. "Blind because I thought only science could save her. But it was never science alone. It was hope. It was faith. It was..." He reached for his daughter, his hands trembling as he held her for the first time while she stood on her own feet. The pride, the shame, the sorrow, all collided inside him, and he broke down in front of them all. And in that moment, no one cared about protocols. No one cared about the hospital board or their rules, because they had witnessed something that no chart, no diagnosis, no sterile report could ever explain. They had witnessed a miracle. Now let me ask you, if you were Amelia's father, would you have allowed Daniel to try, or would you have chosen the surgery instead? Think about it, because that choice could mean everything. And if this story has gripped you so far, don't forget to subscribe, because the final moments of Amelia's journey will change everything you thought you knew about hope, love, and the power of believing in the impossible. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but the memory of that one moment, the moment Amelia stood for the very first time, never faded. It became the cornerstone of her new life. Rehabilitation began, not under the rigid structure of charts and schedules that Dr. Williams had always trusted, but through the patient, compassionate methods Daniel carried in his heart. These were not found in any medical journal, but in the wisdom of his grandmother, whose gentle approach to healing was born from love and observation, not degrees and accolades. Each morning Amelia practiced. Some days her legs trembled so violently she collapsed into Daniel's arms. Some days she grew frustrated, begging to quit, convinced the miracle was only temporary. But Daniel never let her give up. "One step at a time," he whispered, his words steadying her, even when her body refused to. "You don't need to walk the whole path today. Just take the next step in front of you." Slowly, steadily, those steps began to multiply. From gripping the rails of her bed to take a few shaky strides across the therapy room, Amelia's determination grew stronger than her doubts. And with every small victory, Daniel was there. Never as a teacher who commanded, but as a friend who believed. Dr. Williams watched silently from the sidelines at first, humbled, almost ashamed that the boy he once dismissed had become the source of his daughter's transformation. But instead of clinging to pride, he leaned into humility. He began to ask questions, not as a surgeon, but as a father eager to learn. Soon, even the hospital staff took notice, and something extraordinary began to unfold. The hospital, once bound by sterile traditions and rigid procedures, opened its doors to a new philosophy. Compassion was no longer a side note, but a guiding principle. Doctors and nurses began integrating not just Daniel's techniques, but the spirit behind them. The belief that every patient, no matter how hopeless their case seemed, deserved not just medicine, but empathy, patience, and courage. Amelia's progress was no longer just her own. It became a symbol for change, proof that healing was not only about physical treatment, but about restoring hope. And Daniel, oh, how his life transformed. No longer did he sleep beneath bridges or wander the cold streets searching for scraps of food. The Williams family, with hearts forever indebted, welcomed him into their home. He was no longer the homeless boy. He became their son. He became Amelia's brother, her greatest supporter, and the living embodiment of his grandmother's legacy. For the first time in years, Daniel had a bed of his own, a roof over his head, and a family that spoke his name with love instead of scorn. But perhaps the most beautiful gift was knowing that his grandmother's wisdom, once forgotten in a tattered notebook, now shaped the very core of modern healing in that hospital. And then came the day that marked a new chapter forever. The hospital lobby, usually filled with the hurried footsteps of doctors and the rustling of clipboards, fell silent. Nurses paused in their rounds. Patients lifted their heads from wheelchairs. Even the security guards stopped mid-step, as every eye turned toward the grand staircase at the far end of the hall. There she was, Amelia. No longer the fragile girl confined to her bed, no longer hidden by her father's desperation. Step by step, with a mixture of strength and grace, she walked across the lobby floor. Her hand was clasped tightly with Daniel's, the boy who had given her what the world said was impossible. Each step echoed louder than words. Each stride was a testament to resilience, to love, to the miracle of believing in the overlooked. The staff stood in awe, tears welling in their eyes, because they knew they weren't just witnessing a medical recovery. They were witnessing history, a moment that redefined what healing meant. And as Amelia reached the center of the lobby, standing tall, Daniel by her side, the unspoken truth settled into every heart in the room. Sometimes the answers the world needs don't come from titles or wealth or power. They come from love, they come from compassion, they come from the courage to see possibility where others see only failure. Daniel had been overlooked, discarded, and ignored, but he had become the vessel for a miracle. Amelia had been told never her entire life, but she had proved that never is just a word waiting to be rewritten. And so let us remember this: never underestimate the overlooked, for within the shadows may lie the very light the world is waiting for. Now let me ask you, if you were there that day, would you have trusted Daniel? What does this story teach us about hope, about compassion, about believing when everyone else doubts? And if this story has touched you, inspired you, or opened your heart, don't let it end here. Hit like, subscribe, and share this story, because somewhere out there, someone needs this message today.